Former federal prosecutor Neama Rahmani, thanks so much for joining us here on a very busy News Friday.
Yes, Mike, very busy from a legal perspective. Wasn't anticipating this, but another win for former President Donald Trump in the courtroom.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about this, where we thought it was going to be coming sometime in the next week or week and a half, and now everything has shifted to after the election, and the judge said today that he did not want to have a sentencing where it would look or appear as election interference.
A very different statement from Judge Juan Merchan, who had previously and consistently maintained that the presidential election has nothing to do with Donald Trump's criminal case. And today he said something that was the exact opposite, that he was going to delay the sentencing because he didn't want the perception that he was trying to influence the presidential election. So, good news for Donald Trump. I don't think he's going to be sentenced to time, regardless of whether he wins or not. But certainly, it makes it even less likely if he wins in November.
Yeah, so let's talk about these different scenarios that we could possibly see. If he doesn't win the election, what do you think comes November 26th for the sentencing then?
Well, there's two scenarios. If Donald Trump doesn't win the election, scenario one is the sentencing moves forward because Trump loses on presidential immunity. And when we're talking about presidential immunity, there's really two separate issues. The first is, was Donald Trump engaged in official act at the time he was reimbursing Michael Cohen for paying Stormy Daniels? I think the answer to that is probably no. We're talking about actions that took place mostly before Donald Trump was president. He was a candidate for president at the time, but certainly not when he was president. But I think the more difficult question is this: did any evidence of official acts come into that first trial? And we know that the Supreme Court took a very broad view of presidential immunity. They said that official acts are immune, but even evidence of that can't come into trial. And we heard from Hope Hicks and other people who testified in that case. So I think there's the very real possibility that Trump isn't immune, but is granted a new trial because some of the evidence that came in. And if so, if Trump gets a new trial, I can't see any scenario where he's prosecuted, regardless of whether he wins or not. We know a sitting president can't be prosecuted, but even if he loses, I don't think we're going to necessarily go through this whole process again if Kamala Harris is president.
And I want to go to a different topic related to Trump. He was in New York City for a different hearing today in the case there of E. Jean Carroll. And we saw a news conference from him because the hearing went about 20 minutes, and then about 30 minutes later, we had a news conference. And there was a moment where Donald Trump had his attorneys around him, and he says that he wasn't too happy with his attorneys representing him in that particular case.
Well, we know that Donald Trump has gone through a lot of different lawyers, and this is something that's not new to the Eugene Carroll case. Obviously, I think some of Trump's problems in that case were self-inflicted, especially the fact that he came out and defamed Carroll again after a previous jury had ruled that he had sexually assaulted but not raped her. So then, we got a whole new jury. We got a whole new question of damages because liability had already been established. Now, my advice to the former president would have probably been to settle the case. It's just a civil case, so it's just about money. Most of these settlements are confidential anyway. But to go through a very public trial where someone is accusing you of rape, I know Trump's historically his MO has been to deny and defend, but sometimes discretion is the better part of valor, especially when you're in the midst of a very high profile election, one that's going to be very, very close. Probably would have been better off just resolving that case as opposed to having it go through a full blown trial. It's great for legal commentators like myself because Donald Trump is always pushing every case to trial, but sometimes that's not the best course of action.
Yeah, it just seemed a little off-putting for the former president when he is, in fact, not only giving the other side, the prosecution, maybe some more ammo with what he is saying related to Carol, but also giving a lot of the media as well as even Kamala Harris's camp a lot of sound bites to use going forward for this upcoming election as well.
No question. And obviously, Donald Trump, and I want to stay in my legal lane, but, I know enough about politics to know that Trump does better with men and is trying to court female voters. So I don't think that case is necessarily a good issue for him. And, maybe folks have forgotten about it because of some of the criminal cases that have moved forward since the time of those civil judgments. But to bring up the Jean Carroll case and the two judgments there that amount to tens of millions of dollars, really significant sums of money, doesn't seem to make a whole lot of political sense, at least as far as I'm viewing it from a lawyer perspective.
Yeah, there was a couple of big moments already for Donald Trump today, and we are expecting to hear him a little bit later as well. So, Neama Rahmani, thanks so much for joining us and giving us some great insight on these two matters closely related to Donald Trump. We always appreciate it. Have a great weekend as well.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. And you have a good weekend as well. I'm
Thank
sure we'll
you.
talk
Take care.
soon.
All right, everyone. So, we are getting closer.